Section 20 of The Dream, a novel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Dream, a novel by H.G. Wells. Section 20. Chapter the 6th. Marriage in Wartime. Part 7 and 8. Part 7. "Oh, poor little things," cried Starlight. "Oh, poor little, pitiful, pitiless creatures. This story hurts me. I couldn't endure it, if it were anything more than a dream. Why were they all so hard upon each other, and so deaf to the sorrow in each other? We knew no better. This world now has a tempered air. In this world we breathe mercy with our first fluttering gasp. We are so taught and trained to think of others that their pain is ours. But 2,000 years ago, men and women were halfway back to crude nature. Our motives took us unawares. We breathed infections. Our food was poisoned. Our passions were fevers. We were only beginning to learn the art of being human." "But didn't Fanny," began Firefly. "Yes," said Willow. "Didn't Fanny, who was naturally so wise about love. Didn't she take you in hand and send you back to forgive and help your wretched Hetty?" "Fanny heard my version of our story first," said Sarnac. "She never realized the true values of the business until it was too late to stop the divorce. When I told her that Hetty had lived a life of depravity in London while I was in the trenches, she heard me with amazement, but never doubted my word." "And she seemed such a dear," said Fanny. "She seemed so in love with you. It's wonderful how different women are. There's women who seem to change into something else directly they get out of sight of you round the corner. I liked your Hetty, Harry. There was something sweet about her, be what she may. I never dreamt she'd deceive you and let you down. Fancy going about London picking up men. It's just as though she'd done it to me." Matilda Good, too, was wonderfully sympathetic. "No woman goes wrong only just once," said Matilda. "You are right to end it. The Miltons were giving up her drawing-room floor. I could have it if I cared to take it. I was only too glad to take it and return to my old home. Hetty, I suppose, packed up her own belongings as well as she could. She went down from Richmond to her mother's farm at Payton Links, and there it was her child was born. Now I want to tell you," said Sarnac, "what is, I believe, the most remarkable thing in all this story. I'm telling you, I do not remember in all that time, right up to and including our divorce, that I felt any impulse of pity or kindliness, much less of love, towards Hetty. And yet in my dream I was very much the same sort of man as I am today. I was a man of the same type, but I was driven by a storm of amazed and outraged pride and sexual jealousy of the most frantic sort towards acts of spite that are almost inconceivable here and now. I was doing all I could to divorce Hetty in such a way as to force her into marriage with Sumner, for that was the man's name, because I had learned that he was a hopelessly bad character, and because I believed he would make her miserable and mar her life altogether. I wanted to do that to punish her, to fill her with bitter regrets for her treatment of me. But at the same time, it drove me to the verge of madness to think that he should ever possess her again. If my wishes could have been given creative force, Harry would have gone to Sumner disfigured and diseased. They would have come together again amidst circumstances of horrible cruelty. Sarnac, cried Sunray, that you should even dream such things. Dream? It is as men were. It is as they are, except for the education and the free happiness that release us. For we are not fourscore generations from the age of confusion, and that was but a few thousands more from the hairy ape man who bathed the moon in the primeval forests of Europe. Then it was the old man, in lust and anger, ruled his herd of women and children and begot us all. And in the age of confusion, after the great wars, man was, and he still is, the child of that hairy old ape man. Don't I shave myself daily? And don't we educate and legislate with our utmost skill and science to keep the old beast within bounds? But our schools in the days of Harry Mortimer Smith were still halfway back to the cave. Our science was only beginning. We had no sexual education at all, only concealments and repressions. Our code was still the code of jealousy, thinly disguised. The pride and self-respect of a man was still bound up with the animal possession of women. The pride and self-respect of most women was by a sort of reflection bound up with the animal possession of a man. We felt that this possession was the keystone of life. Any failure in this central business involved a monstrous abasement, and against that our poor souls sought blindly for the most extravagant consolations. We hid things, we perverted and misrepresented things, we evaded the issue. Man is a creature which under nearly every sort of stress releases hate and malign action, and we were then still subjected to the extremest stresses. But I will not go on apologizing for Harry Mortimer Smith. He was what the world made him, and so are we. And in my dream, I went about that old world, doing my work, controlling my outward behavior, and spending all the force of my wounded love for Hetty in scheming for her misery. And one thing in particular was of immense importance to my tormented being. It was that I should get another lover quickly, that I should dispel the magic of Hetty's embraces, lay the haunting ghost of my desire for her. I had to persuade myself that I had never really loved her and replace her in my heart by someone I could persuade myself was my own true love. So I sought the company of Millie Kimpton again. We had been close companions before the war, and it was not difficult to persuade myself that I had always been a little in love with her. Always she had been more than a little in love with me. I told her my story of my marriage, and she was hurt for my sake and indignant beyond means with the Hetty I presented to her. She married me within a week of the completion of my divorce.
Part 8. Millie was faithful and Millie was kind. She was a cooling refuge from the heat and distresses of my passion. She had a broad, candid face that never looked either angry or miserable. She held her countenance high, smiling towards heaven with a pleasant confidence and self-satisfaction. She was very fair, and she was broad-shouldered for a woman. She was tender but not passionate. She was intelligently interested in things, but without much whim or humor. She was nearly a year and a half older than I. She had, as people used to say, taken a great fancy to me when first I came into the firm, a crude and inexperienced youngster. She had seen me rise very rapidly to Mr. Cheeseman's position on the editorial staff. He had been transferred to the printing side, and at times she had helped me greatly. We were both popular in Thunderstone House, and when we married, there was a farewell dinner to Millie, who gave up her position then in the counting house. There were speeches and wonderful wedding present of dinner knives and silver forks and spoons in a brass-bound chest of oak with a flattering inscription on a silver plate. There had been a good deal of sympathy with Millie in Thunderstone House, especially among the girls, and a good deal of indignation at me when my first marriage occurred, in my belated recognition of my true destiny, was considered a very romantic and satisfactory end to the story. We secured a convenient little house in a row of stucco houses, all built together to have one architectural effect called Chester Terrace, close to one of the inner parks of London known as Regent's Park. Millie, I discovered, had a little fortune of nearly £2,000, and so she was able to furnish this house very prettily according to current taste, and in this house, in due course, she bore me a son. I rejoiced very greatly and conspicuously over these youngsters' arrival. I think you will understand how essential it was to my obsession for defeating and obliterating Harry that Millie should bear me a child. I worked very hard during that first year of married life, and on the whole, I was happy. But it was not a very rich nor a very deep sort of happiness. It was a happiness made up of rather hard and rather superficial satisfactions. In a sense, I loved Millie very dearly. Her value was above rubies. She was honest and sweet and complacent. She liked me enormously. She was made happy by my attentions. She helped me, watched for my comfort, rejoiced at the freshness and vigor of my work. Yet we did not talk very freely and easily together. I could not let my mind run on before her. I had to shape what I said to her feelings and standards, and they were very different feelings and standards from my own. She was everything a wife should be, except in one matter. She was not for me that particular dear companion for whom the heart of every human being craves, that dear companion with whom you are happy and free and safe. That dear companionship I had met, and I had thrusted from me. Does it come twice in a life to anyone? How should I know? Said Sunray. We know better than to reject it, said Radiant. Perhaps after many years, said Willow, answering Sarnac's question, after one has healed and grown and changed. Millie and I were close friends indeed, but we were never dear companions. I had told Hetty about my sister Fanny on the evening of our first day together, when we walked over the hills. She was instantly sure that she would love Fanny. Fanny had seemed very brave and romantic to Hetty's imagination. But I did not tell Millie of Fanny until close upon our marriage. You will say that it was not Millie's fault that I was shy with her on Fanny's account, but assuredly it was a fault in our relationship. And it was clear that Millie accepted Fanny on my account and refrained from too searching a commentary because of me. Millie believed profoundly in the institution of marriage and in the obligation of an unlimited chastity upon women. "It's a pity she cannot marry this man," said Millie, anticipating perplexities. "It must make everything so inconvenient for her and everyone who knows her. It must be so difficult to introduce her to people." "You needn't do that," I said. "My people are old-fashioned." "They needn't know," I said. "That would be easier way for me, Harry." I found my own declarations of affection for Fanny considerably chilled by the effort Millie made to be generous in the matter. I found it still more difficult to tell her that Fanny's lover was Newberry. "Then is that how you got into Thunderstone House?" asked Millie when at last I got to that revelation. "It's how I got my chance there," I admitted. "I didn't think it was like that. I thought you'd made your way in." "I've made my way up. I've never been favored." "Yes, but do you think people know, Harry? They'd say all sorts of things." "You perceive that Millie was not a very clever woman, and also that she was very jealous of my honor." "I don't think anyone knows who matters," I said. "Neither I nor Fanny advertise." But it was clear Millie did not like the situation. She would have much preferred a world without Sister Fanny. She had no curiosity to see this sister that I loved so dearly, or to find any good in her. On various small but quite valid scores, she put off going to see her for a whole week. And always I had to remind her of Fanny and speak of Fanny first before Fanny could be talked about. In all other matters, Millie was charming and delightful to me. But as far as she could contrive it, she banished Fanny from our world. She could not see how much of my affection went also into banishment. Their meeting, when at last it came about, was bright rather than warm. An invisible ethereminous screen had fallen not only between Millie and Fanny, but between Fanny and myself. Millie had come, resolved to be generous and agreeable in spite of Fanny's disadvantaged status, and I think she was a little disconcerted by Fanny's dress and furniture, for Millie was always very sensitive to furniture, and her sensitiveness had been enhanced by our own efforts to equip a delightful home on a sufficient but not too extravagant expenditure. I had always thought Fanny's furnishings very pretty, but it had never occurred to me that they were, as Millie put it, dreadfully good. But there was a red lacquer cabinet that Millie said afterwards might be worth as much as £100, and she added one of those sentences that came upon one like an unexpected thread of gossamer upon the face. "It doesn't seem right somehow." Fanny's simple dress, I gathered, was far too good also. Simple dresses were the costliest in those days of abundant material and insufficient skill. But these were subsequent revelations, and at the time I did not understand why there should be an obscure undertone of resentment in Millie's manner, nor why Fanny was displaying a sort of stiff sweetness, quite foreign to my impression of her. "It's wonderful to meet you at last," said Fanny. He's talked about you for years. I can remember once long before the war and everything at Hampton Court. I can remember sitting on those seats by the river and he's talking about you. I remember that, I said, though it wasn't the part about Millie that had stuck in my memory. We used to go about together no end in those days, said Fanny. He was the dearest of brothers. I hope he'll still be, said Millie very kindly. A son's a son till he gets a wife, said Fanny, quoting an old woman's proverb. You mustn't say that, said Millie. I hope you'll come to see us quite often. I'd love to come, said Fanny. You are lucky to get a house so easily these days. It isn't quite ready yet, said Millie, but as soon as ever it is, we must find some day when you are free. I'm often free, said Fanny. We'll fix a day, said Millie, obviously quite resolute to ensure that we had no unexpected calls from Fanny when other people might be about. It is nice you have been in the counting house and understanding all about his work, said Fanny. My people didn't like my going into business at all, said Millie, but it's lucky I did. Lucky for Harry, said Fanny. Are your people London people? Dorset, said Millie. They didn't like my coming to London. They are just a little bit churchy and old-fashioned, you know. But it's college or business, I said, and you don't find me staying at home to dust and put out the flowers. One has to take a firm line with one's people at times. Didn't you find that so? There was a convenient aunt in Bedford Park to secure the proprieties and head off the otherwise inevitable latchkey. And it was business instead of college because my best uncle, Uncle Hereward, he is the vicar of Peddlebourne, objects to the higher education of women, and there was also a question of finance. It must be interesting for Harry to meet your people, said Fanny. He's completely conquered Aunt Rachel, said Millie, though she started hostile. Naturally, as I'm about the only Kimpton of 3 generations, they pitched the expectations high. They'd like me to have a husband with a pedigree a yard long. I felt Millie was rather overemphasizing the county family side of the Kimptons. Her father was a veterinary surgeon near Wimborne, but I did not appreciate the qualities in Fanny's bearing and furniture that were putting Millie into this self-assertive mood. They went on to talk with a certain flavor of unreality of the hygienic and social advantages of Regent's Park. It's easy to get to for one's friends, said Millie, and quite a lot of interesting people, actors and critics and writers and all that sort of people, live around and about there. Of course, Harry will want to know more and more of the artistic and the literary world now. I expect we'll have to have a day for them and give them tea and sandwiches. It's a bore, but it's necessary. You know, Harry's got to know people. She smiled at me between pride and patronage. Harry's going up in the world, said my sister. That's what makes it all so wonderful, said Millie. He's a wonderful brother for you. She began to praise the beauty of Fanny's flat, and Fanny offered to show her all over it. They were away some time, and I went to the window, wishing stupidly after the manner of a man that they could somehow contrive to be a little different and a little warmer with each other. Didn't they both love me, and shouldn't that be a bond of sisterhood between them? Then came tea, one of Fanny's wonderful teas, but I was no longer the indiscriminate devourer of teas that I had been. Milly praised it all like a visiting duchess. "Well," said Milly at last, with the air of one who has many appointments, "it is time to go, I'm afraid." I had been watching Fanny very closely throughout this visit and contrasting her guarded and polished civilities with the natural warmth of her reception of Mehedi half a year before. I felt I could not wait for another occasion before I had a word or two with her. So I kissed her goodbye. Even her kiss had changed, and she and Milly hesitated and kissed, and I went down past the landing with Milly and heard the door close above. "I've left my gloves," I said suddenly. "You go on down. I won't be a moment." And I darted back upstairs. Fanny did not come to the door immediately. "What is it, Harry?" she said when she appeared. "Gloves," said I. "No, here they are in my pocket. Silly of me." "You do like her, Fanny. You think she is all right, don't you? She's a little shy with you, but she's a dear." Fanny looked at me. I thought her eyes were hard. "She's all right," she said, "quite all right. You'll never have to divorce her, Harry." "I didn't know. I want you to like her. I thought you didn't seem quite warm." "Silly old Harry," said Fanny, with a sudden return to her old manner, and she took me and kissed me like a loving sister again. I went down 2 steps from the door and turned. "I'd hate it," I said, "if you didn't think she was all right." "She's all right," said Fanny, "and it's good luck to you, Harry. It is. You see, it's about goodbye for me. I shan't be seeing very much of you now with that clever wife of yours to take you about, who is so well connected. But good luck, old brother. Oh, always good luck." Her eyes were brimming with tears. "God send you are happy. Harry dear, after your fashion, it is different." She stopped short. She was weeping. She banged her door upon me, and I stood puzzled for a moment, and then went down to Milly. End of section 20.
Section 21 of The Dream, a Novel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tess Hogue. The Dream, a novel by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 7th, Love and Death, Parts 1 to 4. Part 1. In the 2 years that followed, I learned to love and trust my stiff-spirited wife more and more. She was very brave in a conscious and deliberate way, very clear-headed, very honest. I saw her fight, and it was not an easy fight, to bring our son into the world. And that sort of crisis was a seal between man and woman in those days, even as it is today. If she never got to any just intuitions about my thoughts and feelings, I did presently arrive at a fairly clear sense of hers. I could feel for her ambitions and humiliations. She worked hard to make our home bright and efficient. She had a taste for sound and solid things and temperate harmonies. In that old world, encumbered with possessions and with an extreme household autonomy, servants were a very important matter indeed, and she managed ours with just that measured kindliness and just that avoidance of intimacy that was needed by the social traditions of the time. She had always been intelligently interested in the internal politics of Thunderstone House, and she showed the keenest desire for my success there. "I'll see you a director before 10 years," she said, and I worked very hard indeed, and not merely for ambition's sake. I really understood and believed in the educational importance of that great slovenly business. Newberry came to recognize in me a response to his own ideas. He would consult me about new schemes and the modifications of old procedure. He relied on me more and talked with me more and more frequently. And it is a queer thing to recall that by a sort of convention between us we never mentioned or alluded to my sister Fanny in any of our discussions. I changed a good deal during my first 2.5 years of married life. I matured and hardened. I became a man of the world. I was put up for and elected a member of a good club and developed my gift for talk. I met a widening variety of people, and some of them were quite distinguished people, and I found they did not overawe me. I possessed a gift for caustic commentary that gained me some reputation as a wit, and I felt a growing interest in the showy and sterile game of party politics. My ambitions grew. I was active. I was self-satisfied. I had largely forgotten my intense sexual humiliation, but I was not a very happy man. My life was like a handsome, well-appointed room with a north light. The bowls were full of cut flowers, but the sunlight never came in. Part 2. For 2.5 years, I saw nothing of Hetty, and it was not my fault that I ever saw her again. I did everything I could to eradicate her from my existence. I destroyed her photographs and every little vestige of her that might distress me by its memories. If I caught myself in a reverie in which she figured, I forced my attention to other things. Sometimes, when I made a new success, I had a flash of desire that she should witness it. Ugly, I agree, but is it not what we still are, except for civilization? She came back sometimes in dreams, but they were anger-soaked dreams, and I cultivated my pride and love for Milly. With increasing prosperity, Milly's skill in dressing herself developed. She became a very handsome, effective woman. She gave herself to me with a smiling sense of temperate and acceptable giving. In those days we had not learned to analyze our motives. We were much less observant of ourselves than men and women are today. I had to set my mind upon loving Milly, and I did not realize that the essential thing in loving is a thing beyond our wills. Fanny and Hetty I loved by nature and necessity, but my days were now far too completely apportioned between work and Milly for much companionship with Fanny to survive, and Hetty, in my heart, was like one of those poor shriveled corpses of offending monks they walled up in the monasteries during the age of Christendom in Europe. But I found now a curious liveliness in my interest in women in general. I did not ask what these wanderings of attention signified. I was ashamed of them, but I gave way to them. Even when I was in Milly's company, I would look at other women and find a vague excitement if the intent of my glances was returned. And I began to read novels in a new spirit, though I did not know why I was taking to novels. I was reading them, I see now, for the sake of the women I found in them. I do not know, Sunray, whether you realize how much the novels and plays of those days served to give men and women love phantoms with whom they made imaginative excursions. We successful and respectable ones went about our dignified and satisfied ways assuaging the thin protests of our starved possibilities with such unsubstantial refreshment. But it was because of that wandering eye for women that I encountered Hetty again. It was in the springtime that I came upon her, either in March or very early April, in some public gardens quite near to Chester Terrace. These gardens were not in my direct way from the Underground Railway station which took me to and fro between home and business and my house. But I was in no hurry for Milly's tea party, and the warmth and sunlight drew me to this place of blossom and budding green. They were what we should call spring gardens nowadays, small but cleverly laid out for display with an abundant use of daffodil, narcissus, hyacinth, almond blossom, and the like, with hard paths and seats placed to command happy patches of color. On one of these seats a woman was sitting alone with her back to me, looking at a patch of silas. I was struck by the loveliness of her careless pose. Such discoveries of the dear beauty that hides in the world would stir me like a challenge and then stab me with pain. She was dressed very poorly and simply, but her dingy clothing was no more than the smoked glass one uses to see the brightness of the sun. I slackened my pace as I went past and glanced back to see her face, and I saw the still face of Mehedi, very grave and sorrowful. Mehedi, no longer a girl, but a woman, looking at the flowers and quite unheedful of my regard. Something greater than pride or jealousy seized me then. I went a few steps farther and stopped and turned, as though no other thing was possible. At that she became aware of me. She looked up, doubted, and recognized me. She watched me with that motionless face of hers as I came and sat down beside her. I spoke in a voice of astonishment on the edge of a storm of emotion. "Mehedi," I said, "I couldn't go past you." She did not answer immediately. "Are you—" she began and stopped. "I suppose we were bound to meet again," she said, "sooner or later. You look as if you had grown, Harry. You look well and prosperous." "Do you live in this part of London?" I asked. "Camden Town just now," she said. "We move about." "You married Sumner?" "What did you expect me to do? What else was there to do? I've drunk my cup to the dregs, Harry." "But you had the child?" "It died. It died all right, poor little mite. And my mother died a year ago." "Well, you've got Sumner." "I've got Sumner." At any time before that meeting, I should have exulted over the death of Sumner's child. But in the presence of Mehedi's misery, that old hatred would not come back for its gratification. I was looking at her face, which was so familiar and so changed, and it was as if I woke up again to love for her after 2 years and a half of insensibility. What a beaten and unhappy thing she was, she whom I had loved and hated so bitterly. "It seems a long way back now to Kent, Harry, and Mother's farm," she said. "You've parted with it?" "Farm and furniture, and mostly it's gone. Sumner bets. He's betted most of it away. It's hard, you see, to find a job, but easy to fancy a winner, which doesn't win." "My father used to do that," I said. "I'd like to shoot every racehorse in England." "I hated selling the farm," she said. "I sold the farm and came into this dingy old London. Sumner dragged me here and he's dragging me down. It's not his fault. It's how he's made. But when a spring day comes like this, I think of Kent, and the winds on the downs, and the blackthorn in the hedges, and the little yellow noses of the primroses, and the first elder leaves coming out, until I want to cry and scream. But there's no getting out of it. Here I am. I've come to look at these flowers here. What's the good? They just hurt me." She stared at the flowers. "My God," I said, "but this hurts me too. I didn't expect—" "What did you expect?" she asked, and turned that still face of hers to me and silenced me. "I don't see that it should hurt you," she said. "I brought it on myself. You didn't do it. It happened to me. It was my fault. Though why God made me love beautiful things, and then set a trap for me and made me fool enough to fall into it." Silence fell between us. "Meeting you like this," I began presently, "makes me see things so differently. You see, in those days, in some ways you seemed so much stronger than I was. I didn't understand. I see, this makes me feel I ought to have taken better care of you, or shown me mercy. I was dirty and shameful, yes, all that, but you were merciless, Harry. Men are merciless to women. I did, all through. I loved you, Harry. In a way I've always loved you, and I love you now. When I looked up and saw it was you coming back to me, for a minute you were just like the old Harry. For a moment it was like spring coming real. But it's no good talking like that now, Harry. It's too late." "Yes," I agreed. "Too late." She watched my face through a long pause. I weighed my words when I spoke. Up to now, I said, I've never forgiven. Now I see you here. I wish to God I had forgiven you and made a fight for it with you. We might. Suppose I had forgiven you. Harry, dear, she said softly, you don't want to be seen here making a woman cry. We won't talk of that. Tell me about yourself. I've heard you married again, a beautiful woman. Sumner saw that I heard of that. Are you happy, Harry? You look prosperous, and everyone isn't prosperous these post-war times. That's all so-and-so, Hetty. I work hard. I've got ambitions. I'm still a publisher's assistant at the old place, but I'm near to being a director. I'm high up. My wife, she's a dear and great help to me. Somehow, meeting you... My God. Hetty, what a mess we've made of things. It's all very well, but the second time of marrying isn't like the first. You and I'm a sort of blood brother to you, and nothing can change it. The wood, that little wood where you kissed me, why did we smash it up, Hetty? Why did we do it? Two fools who got so precious a thing. That's all past, but hate is dead between us. That's past too. If there was anything I could do for you, now I would do it. A gleam of the old humor came. If you could kill Sumner, she said, and smash the world and destroy the memories of 3 years. It's no good, Harry. I ought to have kept myself clean. And you might have been gentler with me. I couldn't, Hetty. I knew you couldn't. And I couldn't foresee that my blood would betray me one evening. And here we are. Like mating after we are dead. Spring comes now, but it comes for other people. And all these little carcass trumpets, like a brass band it is, they are trumpeting up the next lot of lovers. Better luck to them. We sat still for a time. In the background of my mind, Billy and her assembled teacups became evident as a faint urgency. You're late, she'd say. Where are you living, Hetty? I asked. What is your address? She shook her head after a moment's thought. Better you shouldn't know. But somehow I might help. It would only disturb us all. I've got my cup of dirty water to drink. I've got to stand what I'm in for. What could you do to help me? Well, said I, my address anyhow is easy to keep in mind. It's just what it was in the days when we lived. Thunderstone House it is. Someday there might be something. It's good of you. We stood up face to face, and we stood there 1,000 circumstances vanished, and nothing remained but our hurt and injured selves. Goodbye, Hetty, I said. Good luck. Our hands met. Good luck to you, Harry. It's no good, but I'm glad we met like this, and to find you forgive me a little at last. Part 3. That meeting had a profound effect upon me. It banished much aimless reverie from my mind. It unlocked the prison in which a whole multitude of forbidden thoughts had been confined. I thought enormously of Hetty. They were vague and impossible thoughts. They came in the night, on the way to business, even during slack moments in business hours. Rehearsals of dramatized encounters, explanations, magic turns of circumstances that suddenly restored our lost world to us. I tried to suppress these cloudy imaginations, but with little avail. They overspread my mental skies in spite of me. I can't tell you how many times I walked through those gardens in Regent's Park. That detour became my normal route from the station to my home. And I would even go out of my customary way along some side paths because I had caught a glimpse far off, between the tree branches and the flower beds, of a solitary woman. But Hetty never came back there. In my brooding over Hetty, a jealousy and hatred of Sumner developed steadily. I do not think I had any desire for Hetty myself, but I wanted intensely to get her away from him. This hostility to Sumner was the ugly undertow of my remorse and reawakened love of Hetty. He was the evil thing that had deprived me of Hetty. I did not reflect for a moment that it was I, with my relentless insistence upon divorce, that had forced her back to him. And all this dreaming and brooding and futile planning, and all this body of desire for something more to happen between Mehedi and myself went on without my breathing a word of it to any living soul. It was on my conscience that it was disloyal to Millie, and I even made a half-hearted attempt to tell Millie that I had met Mehedi and been shocked at her poverty and unhappiness. I wanted to bring her into my own state of mind and have her feel as I did. I threw out a remark one day, we had gone to Hampstead Heath for a walk one afternoon, that I had once walked along that ridge by the round pond with Mehedi during my last leave. I wonder how she is living now, I said. Millie did not answer immediately, and when I looked at her, her face was flushed and hard. I hoped you had forgotten her, she said in a suffocated voice. This brought it back to me. I tried never to think of her. You don't know what that woman meant to me, the humiliation. It was not only for myself, she added. It was for you. She said no more, but it was manifest how terribly the mere name of Mehedi had disturbed her. Poor little things, cried Firefly. How insanely jealous you all were. And I did not go to Fanny and tell her about Mehedi for a time. I had misrepresented Mehedi to her as a figure of common depravity, and I found it difficult to put that right. Nowadays, I did not see so much of Fanny as I had formerly done. She was living halfway across London from me. Her relations with Newbury were now much more public than they had been, and she developed a circle of acquaintances who cared for her. But this publicity made Millie more stiff toward her, because she feared that a scandal would be made about Fanny in relation to my position in the firm of Crane and Newbury. Near Pangbourne, Newbury had taken a bungalow, and there Fanny would spend whole weeks at a time, quite out of our range. But presently a situation developed which sent me post-haste to Fanny for help and advice. Part 4. Suddenly in July, when I was beginning to think I should never hear from her again, Mehedi appealed to me for help. Would I meet her one evening, she asked, by the fountain in the park near the Zoological Gardens, and then we could get chairs and she would tell me what she had in mind. She did not want me to write her a letter. Sumner had become very jealous of her, and so would I put an advertisement in the Daily Express with the letters A, B, C, D, and giving the hour and date. I made an appointment for the earliest possible evening. Instead of the despondent and spiritless Mehedi I had met in the spring, I found a Mehedi high-strung and excited. I want some place where we shan't be seen, she said as I came out to her. She took my arm to turn me about and led the way towards the 2 green chairs standing apart a little way from the main walk that here traversed the park. I noted that she was still wearing the same shabby dress she had had on our previous encounter. Her manner with me was quite different from the manner of our former meeting. There was something familiar and confident about her, as though in between she had met me in imagination a multitude of times, as no doubt she had. You meant all you said, Harry, when we talked before, she began. Everything. You will help me if you can? Everything I can. Suppose I asked you for some money? Naturally. I want to get away from Sumner. I have a chance. I could do it. Tell me about it, Mehedi. All I can do, I will. Things have changed, Harry, since that day we met. I got into a sort of despairing state. I took whatever came. Seeing you changed me. I don't know why it did. Perhaps I was going to change anyhow. But I can't stand being with Sumner any longer. There's a chance now. I shall want a lot of money. 60 or 70 pounds. I thought. That's quite possible, Mehedi, if you can wait a week or so, 10 days, say. You see, I have a friend, a girl who married a Canadian. She stayed here to have her child when he went home, and now she goes out to him. She's been ill. She's not very strong. She doesn't want to face the voyage alone. It would be easy for me to get out there with her as her cousin and companion. If I had an outfit, we've discussed it all. She knows someone who could manage about a passport for me in my maiden name. That's the scheme. I could have my outfit sent to her place. I could slip away. You'd take another name? Begin again over there? Yes. I sat considering this project. It pleased me. There need be no trouble about the money, I said. I can't go on living with Sumner. You never saw him. You don't know what he's like. I've heard he was good-looking. Don't I know that face, flushed and weak? He's a liar and a cheat. He has a conceit he can best everyone, and he's begun drinking. God knows why I married him. It seemed the natural thing somehow since you had divorced me. The child had to have a father. But he disgusts me, Harry. He disgusts me. I can't go on. I can't endure it. You can't imagine it, in those little lodgings in the hot weather, to keep a maudlin drunken man away from one. If I hadn't seen this way out, something worse might have happened. Can't you come away from him at once? I asked. Why should you ever go back to him? No, I must get clear away or there will be mischief, and you mustn't be in it. He'd think of you at once if he had a hint it was you. That's what you have to do about the money and everything, letters or anything. Get it to me without your being mixed up with it. You must get me money, not checks. We mustn't be seen to meet. Even about here it's risky. He's got into a gang. He's been getting deeper and deeper into a rotten set. They blackmail the bookies. They go about with revolvers. Pass on things to one another. It grew out of betting, and now they call it getting a bit of their own back. If they spot you in it, they'll come for you. Trench warfare in London. I'll risk it. You needn't risk anything, if we are discreet. If there was someone I could see who'd hand things on. I thought at once of my sister Fanny. That would be safe, said Hetty. As safe as could be, and I'd love to see her again. I loved her when I met her, but all this is awful good of you, Harry. I don't deserve a moment's kindness. Nonsense. I pushed you into the dirt, Hetty. I jumped into it. Fell into it. It's nothing very much, Hetty, to give you a hand to get out of it again. End of section 21.
Section 22 of The Dream, a Novel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Dream, a novel by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 7th, Love and Death, Parts 5 through 7. Part 5. I went the next day to my sister Fanny to prepare for Hetty's call. Fanny sat in an armchair and listened and watched my face as I told my story, confessed how I had exaggerated Hetty's offense and asked for help. I ought to have seen her, Harry, before I took your word for it, she said. Of course, even now, I can't imagine how a girl who loves one man could ever stand the kiss of another as she did. But then, as you say, she'd been drinking. We women aren't all made alike. There's all sorts make a world. Some girls, the backbone goes out of them when they feel a man's kisses. You and me, Harry, we aren't made like that. I've been thinking while you sat talking there, how like we both are to poor Mother, really, for all she quarreled with me. We'll grow hard presently if we aren't careful. And your Hetty was young, and she didn't know. Only once it was, and all her life been spoilt by it. I didn't know it was like that, Harry. And my sister Fanny began to recall her impressions of Hetty. She recalled her fine animation and the living interest of her talk. When she left, I said to myself, she's got wit. That's the first witty woman I've ever met. She's got poetry in her. Everything she says comes out a little different from the things most people say. She says things that come like flowers in a hedgerow. So she did. Does she still? I never thought of it like that before, I said. I suppose she has a sort of poetry. Only the other day when I met her first, what was it she said? Something. It's no good quoting, Harry. Witty things should bloom where they grow. They're no good as cut flowers. But you and I are fairly quick and fairly clever, Harry, but we've never had any of that. I've always loved her talk, I said. I began to explain the situation to Fanny more fully. and to show how she could help in it. I was not to see Hetty again. Fanny was to see her, pay her the £100 we could put together for her, communicate with the friends she was to accompany, and get her away. Fanny listened gravely and agreed. Then she reflected. "Well, why don't you take her to Canada yourself, Harry?" she asked abruptly. Part 6. I did not answer Fanny for some moments. Then I said, "I don't want to." "I can see you love Hetty still." "Love, but I don't want that." "You don't want to be with her?" "It's out of the question. Why ask a painful thing like that? All that is dead." "Isn't a resurrection possible? Why is it out of the question? Pride?" "No." "Why then?" "Milly." "You don't love Milly." "I won't have you discuss that, Fanny. I do love her." "Not as you love Hetty." "Quite differently. But Milly trusts me. She keeps faith with me. I'd as soon steal money from a child's money box as go back on Milly." "It's wonderful how fine men can be to the wives they don't love," said Fanny bitterly. "Newberry's different," I said. "I've got my little son. I've got my work. And though you will never have it, I love Milly." "In a way. Is she company for you? Is she fun?" "I trust and love her. And as for Hetty, you don't understand about Hetty. I love her. I love her enormously. But it's like two ghosts meeting by moonlight. We two are dead to each other and sorrowful. It isn't as though it was anything like your case over again. I see Hetty in hell, and I'd do nearly anything in life to get her out. I don't even want to meet her. I want her to get away out of this filth and stupidity where she can begin again. That's all I want, and that's all she wants. How could she and I ever come together again? How could we kiss again, as lovers kiss? Poor defiled things we are. And all my cruelty. You're thinking of something else, Fanny. You're not thinking of Hetty and me." "Maybe I am," said Fanny. "Yes, I think I am. And so she is to go to Canada and begin again, till her health comes back and her courage comes back? It isn't natural for a woman of her temperament to live without a man to love her, Harry." "Let her live and love," said I. "She'll have changed her name. Her friends will stand by her. They won't give her away. Let her forget. Let her begin again." "With another man?" "It may be." "You don't mind the thought of that?" I was stung, but I kept my temper. Have I any right to mind the thought of that now? "But you will. And you will go on living with this wife you trust and respect, who's dull-spirited, dull as dishwater." "No, who's my son's mother, who is trustworthy, whom I'm pledged to. And I've got my work. It may seem nothing to you. It's good enough for me to give myself to it. Can't I love Hetty? Can't I help her out of the net she's in, and yet not want to go back to impossible things?" "Gray Monday mornings," said Fanny. "As if all life wasn't gray," I said. "And then," said Sarnac, "I remember that I made a prophecy. I made it. When did I make it? 2,000 years ago? Or 2 weeks ago?" I sat in Fanny's little sitting room, an old-world creature amidst her old-world furnishings, And I said that men and women would not always suffer as we were suffering then. I said that we were still poor savages, living only in the bleak dawn of civilization, and that we suffered because we were underbred, undertrained, and darkly ignorant of ourselves. That the mere fact that we knew our own unhappiness was the promise of better things, and that a day would come when charity and understanding would light the world, so that men and women would no longer hurt themselves and one another, as they were doing now everywhere, universally, in law and in restriction, and in jealousy and in hate, all round and about the earth. "It is still too dark for us," I said, "to see clearly where we are going, and every one of us blunders and stumbles and does wrong. Every one. It is idle for me to ask now what is the right thing for me to do. Whatever I do now will be wrong. I ought to go with Hetty and be her lover again. Easily I could do that. And why should I deny it? And I ought to stick to Milly and the work I have found in the world. Right road or left road, both lead to sorrow and remorse. But there is scarcely a soul in all this dark world, Fanny, who has not had to make, or will not presently have to make, a choice as hard. I will not pull the skies down upon Milly. I cannot, because she has put her faith in me. You are my dear sister, Fanny, and I love you, and we have loved each other. Do you remember how you used to take me round to school and hold my hand at crossings? Don't make things too hard for me now. Just help me to help Hetty. Don't tear me to pieces. She is still alive and young, and Hetty, out there she at least can begin again." Part 7. Nevertheless, I did see Hetty again before she left England. There came for a letter for me at Thunderstone House, in which she proposed a meeting. "You have been so kind to me," she wrote. "It is the next best thing to your never having left me. You have been a generous dear. You've given back happiness to me. I feel excited already at the thought of the great liner and the ocean, and full of hope. We've got a sort of picture of the ship. It is like a great hotel with our cabin marked in it, exactly where it is. Canada will be wonderful. Our Lady of the Snows, and we are going by way of New York. New York, like nothing else on earth. Cliffs and crags of windows towering up to the sky. And it's wonderful to have new things again. I sneak off to Fanny's just to finger them over. I'm excited, yes, and grateful, yes, and full of hope, yes. And Harry, my heart aches and aches. I want to see you again. I don't deserve to, but I want to see you again. We began with a walk, and why shouldn't we end with a walk? Thursday and Friday, all the gang will be at Leeds. I could get away the whole day either day, and it would be a miracle if anyone knew. I wish we could have that same old walk again. I suppose it's too far and impossible. We'll save that, Harry, until we're both quite dead, and then we'll be two little swirls of breeze in the grass, or two bits of thistledown going side by side. But there was that other walk we had when we went to Sheer, and right over the North Downs to Leatherhead. We looked across the Weald and saw our own South Downs far, far away. Pinewood and heather there was, hills beyond hills, and the smoke of rubbish burning. I was to write to Fanny's address. Of course, we had that walk, we two half-resuscitated lovers. We did not make love at all, though we kissed when we met, and we meant to kiss when we parted. We talked as I suppose dead souls might talk of the world that had once been real. We talked of 100 different things, even of Sumner. Now that she was so near escape from him, her dread and hatred had evaporated. She said Sumner had a passionate desire for her and a real need for her, and that it was not fair to him and very bad for him that she despised him. It wounded his self-respect. It made him violent and defiant. A woman who cared for him, who would take the pains to watch him and care for him as a woman should do for a man, might have made something of him. But I've never cared for him, Harry, though I've tried. But I can see where things hurt him. I can see they hurt him frightfully at times. It doesn't hurt him any the less because he does ugly things. He was vain, too, and ashamed of his incapacity to get a sufficient living. He was drifting very rapidly to a criminal life, and she had no power over him to hold him back. I can still see Hetty and hear her voice as we walked along a broad bridle path between great rhododendron bushes, and she talked, grave and balanced and kind she was, of this rogue who had cheated her and outraged her and beaten her. It was a new aspect of Hetty, and yet at the same time it was the old dear Hetty I had loved and wasted and lost, clear-minded and swift, with an understanding better than her will. We sat for a long time on the crest of the downs above Sheer, where the view was at its widest and best, and we recalled the old days of happiness in Kent, and talked of the distances before us, and of crossing the sea, and of France, and so the whole wide world. I feel, she said, as I used to when I was a child at the end of the school quarter. I'm going away to new things. Put on your frock. Put on your hat. The big ship is waiting. I am a little frightened about it and rather happy. I wish. But never mind that. You wish? What else could I wish? You mean? It's no good wishing. I've got to stick to the job I've taken. I've got to see it through. But if you care to know it, Hetty, I wish so too. My God, if wishes could release one. You've got your job here. I wouldn't take you away, Harry, if I could. Sturdy you are, Harry, and you'll go through with it and do the work you're made to do, and I'll take what comes to me. Over there, I guess I'll forget a lot about Sumner and the things that happened in between, and think a lot about you and the South Downs, and this, how we sat side by side here. Perhaps, said Hetty, heaven is a place like this. A great hillside to which you come at last, after all the tugging and pushing and the hoping and the disappointments and the spurring and the hungers and the cruel jealousies are done with and finished forever. Then here you sit down and rest. And you aren't alone. Your lover is here and he sits beside you and you just touch shoulder to shoulder. Very close and very still. And your sins are forgiven you. Your blunders and misunderstandings, they matter no longer. And the beauty takes you and you dissolve into it. You dissolve into it side by side. And together you forget and fade until at last nothing remains of all the distresses and anger and sorrow. Nothing remains of you at all but the breeze upon the great hillside and sunshine and everlasting peace. All of which, said Hetty, rising abruptly to her feet and standing over me, is just empty nothingness. Oh, Harry, Harry, one feels things, and when one tries to say them, it is just words and nonsense. We've hardly started on our way to Leatherhead, and you'll have to be back by 7. So get up, old Harry. Get up and come on. You are the dearest person alive, and it has been sweet of you to come with me today. I was half afraid you'd think it wasn't wise." In the late afternoon, we got to a place called Little Bookham, and there we had tea. About a mile farther on was a railway station, and we found a train for London. It came in as we got on to the platform. Everything had gone well so far, and then came the first gleam of disaster. At Leatherhead we sat looking out on the station platform, and a little ruddy man came trotting along to get into the compartment next to us. A little common fellow, like an ostler with a cigar under his Hebrew nose. And as he was about to get in, he glanced up at us. Doubt and then recognition came into his eyes, and at the sight of him, Hetty recoiled. "Get in," said the guard, blowing his whistle, and the little man was hustled out of sight. Hetty was very white. "I know that man," she said, "and he knows me. He's named Barnardo. What shall I do?" "Nothing. Does he know you very well?" "He's been to our rooms 3 or 4 times. "He may not have been sure it was you." "I think he was. Suppose he were to come to the window at the next station to make certain. Could I pretend not to be myself? Refuse to recognize him or answer to my name?" "But if he was convinced it was you, in spite of your bluff, that would instantly make him suspicious, and off he'd go to your husband. If, on the other hand, you took it all quite casually, said I was your cousin or your brother-in-law, he might think nothing of it and never even mention it to Sumner. But making him suspicious would send him off to Sumner right away. Anyhow, you go to Liverpool tomorrow. I don't see that his recognition of you matters." "I'm thinking of you," she said. "But he doesn't know who I am. So far as I know, none of that lot has seen me." The train slowed down at the next station. Mr. Barnardo appeared, cigar and all, bright-eyed and curious. "Bless if I didn't say to myself, that's Hetty Sumner," said Mr. Barnardo. "Wonderful how one meets people." "My brother-in-law, Mr. Dyson," said Hetty, introducing me. "We've been down to see his little daughter." "I didn't know you had a sister, Miss Sumner." "I haven't," said Hetty, with a note of pain in her voice. "Mr. Dyson is a widower." "Sorry," said Mr. Barnardo. "Stupid of me. And at what age might the little girl be, Mr. Dyson?" I found myself under the necessity of creating, explaining, and discussing an orphan daughter. Mr. Barnardo had 3 and was uncomfortably expert about children and their phases of development. He was evidently a model father. I did as well as I could. I drew out Mr. Barnardo's family pride rather than indulge my own. But I was immensely relieved when Mr. Barnardo exclaimed, "Good! Here's Epton already. Glad to have met you, Mr. Damn, I said to myself. I had forgotten. "Dixon," said Hetty hastily, and Mr. Barnardo, after effusive farewells, proceeded to remove himself from the carriage. "Thank heaven," said Hetty, "he didn't come on to London. You're the poorest liar, Harry, I've ever known. As it is, no harm's been done." "No harm's been done," said I. But 2 or 3 times before we reached the London station, where we were to part forever, we recurred to the encounter and repeated the reassuring formula that no harm had been done. We parted at Victoria Station with very little emotion. Mr. Barnardo had brought us back, as it were, to an everyday and incidental atmosphere. We did not kiss each other again, The world about us had become full now of observant eyes. My last words to Mehedi were, "Everything's all right," in a businesslike, reassuring tone. And the next day she slipped off to join her friends at Liverpool and passed out of my life forever. End of section 22. Read by Heather McKee. October 2023.
Section 23 of The Dream, a Novel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by MoonLylith. The Dream, a Novel by H.G. Wells. Section 23, Chapter the 7th, Love and Death, Parts 8 and 9. Part 8. For 3 or 4 days, I did not feel this second separation from Mehedi very greatly. My mind was still busy with the details of her departure. On the 3rd day, she sent me a wireless message, as we used to call it, to Thunderstone House. "Well away," she said. "Fine weather. Endless love and gratitude." Then slowly as the days passed, my sense of loss grew upon me. The intimations of an immense loneliness gathered and spread until they became a cloud that darkened all my mental sky. I was persuaded now that there was no human being who could make me altogether happy but Mehedi, and that for the second time I was rejecting the possibility of companionship with her. I had wanted love, I perceived, without sacrifice. And in that old world, it seems to me now, love was only possible at an exorbitant price. Sacrifice of honor, sacrifice of one's proper work in the world, humiliations and distresses. I had shirked the price of Mehedi, and she was going from me, taking out of my life forever all those sweet, untellable things that were the essence of love, the little names, the trivial, careless caresses, the exquisite gestures of mind and body, the moments of laughter and pride and perfect understanding. Day by day, love went westward from me. Day and night I was haunted by a more and more vivid realization of a great steamship, throbbing and heaving its way across the crests and swelling waves of the Atlantic welter. The rolling black coal smoke from its towering funnels poured before the wind. Now I would see that big, ocean-going fabric in the daylight, now lit brightly from stem to stern, under the stars. I was full of unappeasable regret. I indulged in endless reveries of a flight across the Atlantic in pursuit of Mehedi, of a sudden dramatic appearance before her. "Mehedi, I can't stand it! I've come!" And all the time, I stuck steadfastly to the course I had chosen. I worked hard and late at Thunderstone House. I did my best to shunt my imagination into new channels by planning 2 new quasi-educational publications, and I set myself to take Millie out to restaurants to dinner, and to the theater, and to interesting shows. And in the midst of some picture show, perhaps, I would find my rebel mind speculating what sort of thing Mehedi would have said of it, had she been there. There was a little show of landscapes at the Alpine Gallery, and several were pictures of downland scenery, and one showed a sunlit hillside under drowsy white clouds. It was almost like seeing Mehedi. It was exactly a week after Mehedi's landing in New York that I first encountered Sumner. It was my usual time of arrival, and I was just turning out of Tottenham Court Road into the side street that led to the yard of Thunderstone House. There was a small public house in this byway, and 2 men were standing outside it in attitudes of expectation. One of them stepped out to accost me. He was a little flushed Jewish man, and for the moment I did not recognize him at all. "Mr. Smith," said he, and scrutinized me queerly. "At your service," said I. "Not by any chance Mr. Dyson or Dixon, eh?" he asked with a leer. "Bernardo?" cried my memory, and placed him. My instant recognition must have betrayed itself in my face. Our eyes met, and there were no secrets between them. "No, Mr. Bernardo," I said with incredible stupidity. "My name's just plain Smith." "Don't mention it, Mr. Smith, don't mention it," said Mr. Bernardo with extreme politeness. "I had a sort of fancy I might have met you before." And turning to his companion and raising his voice a little, he said, "That's him all right, Sumner. Sure as eggs are eggs." Sumner? I glanced at this man who had given my life so disastrous a turn. He was very much my own height and build, fair with a blotched complexion and wearing a checkered gray suit and an experienced-looking gray felt hat. He might have been my unsuccessful half-brother. Our eyes met in curiosity and antagonism. "I'm afraid I'm not the man you want," I said to Bernardo, and went on my way. I didn't see any advantage in an immediate discussion in that place. I perceived that an encounter was inevitable, but I meant it to happen amid circumstances of my own choice, and after I had time to consider the situation properly. I heard something happen behind me, and Bernardo said, "Shut up, you fool! You found out what you want to know." I went through the passages and rooms of Thunderstone House to my office, and there, when I was alone, I sat down in my armchair and swore very heartily. Every day since the departure of Mehedi, I had been feeling more and more sure that this, at least, was not going to happen. I had thought that Sumner was very easily and safely and completely out of the story. I took my writing pad and began to sketch out the situation. "Ends to be secured," I wrote. Number 1. Mehedi must not be traced. Number 2. Millie must hear nothing of this. Number 3. No blackmailing. I considered, "But if a lump payment," I began. This I scratched out again. I had to scheme out the essential facts. What does S know? What evidence exists? Of what? No clue to lead to Fanny. There is nothing but that journey in the train. He will have a moral certainty, but will it convince anyone else? I wrote a new heading: How to Handle Them. I began to sketch grotesques and arabesques over my paper as I plotted. Finally, I tore it up into very small fragments and dropped it into my wastepaper basket. A messenger girl rapped and came in with a paper slip, bearing the names of Fred Sumner and Arthur Bernardo. "They've not put the business they want to talk about," I remarked. "They said you'd know, sir." "No excuse. I want everybody to fill in that," I said. "Just say I'm too busy to see strangers who don't state their business, and ask them to complete the form." Back came the form. Inquiry about Mr. Sumner's missing wife. I considered it calmly. "I don't believe we ever had the manuscript. Say I'm engaged up to 12:30. Then I could have a talk of 10 minutes with Mr. Sumner alone. Make that clear. I don't see where Mr. Bernardo comes in. Make it clear it's a privilege to see me." My messenger did not reappear. I resumed my meditations on the situation. There was time for a lot of aggressive energy to evaporate before 12:30. Probably both of the men had come in from the outskirts and would have nowhere to wait but the streets or a public house. Mr. Bernardo might want to be back upon his own business at Epsom. He'd played his part in identifying me. Anyhow, I didn't intend to have any talk with Sumner before a witness. If he reappeared with Bernardo, I should refuse to see them. For Bernardo alone I had a plan, and for Sumner I had a plan, but not for the two of them together. My delaying policy was a good one, and at 12:30, Sumner came alone and was shown up to me. "Sit down there," I said abruptly, and leaned back in my chair and stared at his face and waited in silence for him to begin. For some moments he did not speak. He had evidently expected me to open with some sort of question, and he had come ready loaded with a reply. To be plumped into a chair and looked at put him off his game. He tried to glare at me, and I looked at his face as if I was looking at a map. As I did so, I found my hatred for him shrinking and changing. It wasn't a case for hatred. He had such a poor, mean, silly face, a weak arrangement of plausibly handsome features. Every now and then it was convulsed by a nervous twitch. His straw-colored mustache was clipped back more on one side than the other, and his rather frayed necktie had slipped down to display his collar stud and the grubbiness of his collar. He had pulled his mouth a little askew and thrust his face forward in an attempt at fierceness, and his rather watery blue eyes were as open and as protruded as he could manage. "Where's my wife, Smith?" he said at last. "Out of my reach, Mr. Sumner, and out of yours. Where've you hid her?" "She's gone," I said. "It's no work of mine. She's come back to you." I shook my head. "You know where she is?" "She's gone clear, Sumner. You let her go." "Let her go? You let her go. But I'm not going to. I'm not that sort. Here's this girl you marry and mess about with, and when she comes across a man who's a bit more of a man than you are and handles her as a woman ought to be handled, you go and chuck her out and divorce her. Divorce her with her child coming, and then start planning and plotting to get her away from the man she's given her love to." He stopped for want of words or breath. He wanted to exasperate me and start a shouting match. I said nothing. "I want Hetty back," he said. "She's my wife, and I want her back. She's mine, and the sooner this foolery stops, the better." I sat up to the desk and put my elbows on it. "You won't get her back," I said very quietly. "What are you going to do about it?" "By God, I'll have her back if I swing for it." "Exactly. And what are you going to do?" "What can I do? I'm her husband." "Well, you've got her." "Not a scrap of her. She's missing. I can go to the police." "Go to them. What will they do?" "I can put them on to you." "Not a bit of it. They won't bother about me. If your wife's missing and you go to the police, they'll clear up all your gang with their inquiries. They'll be only too glad of the chance. Trouble me, they'll dig up the cellars in your house and in your previous house to find the body. They'll search you and ransack you. And what they don't do to you, your pals will." Sumner leaned forward and grimaced like a gargoyle to give his words greater emphasis. "You were the last man seen with her," he said. "Not a scrap of evidence." Sumner cursed vigorously. "He saw you." "I can deny that, absolutely." "Frosty little witness, your friend Bernardo. Don't be too sure he'll stick it. Nasty business if a woman disappears and you find yourself trying to fix something that won't hold water onto someone her husband dislikes. If I were you, Sumner, I wouldn't take that line, even if he backs you up. What does it prove? You know of nobody else who pretends to have seen me with Hetty. You won't be able to find anybody." Mr. Sumner extended his hand towards my table. He was too far away to bang it properly, so he pulled his chair up closer. The bang, when it came, was ineffective. "Look here," he said, and moistened his lips. "I want my Hetty back, and I'm going to have her back. You are precious cool and cucumberish and all that just now, but by God, I'll worm you up before I've done with you. You think you can get her away and bluff me off? Never made such a mistake in your life. Suppose I don't go to the police. Suppose I go for direct action. Suppose I come around to your place and make a fuss with your wife." "That will be a nuisance," I said. He followed up his advantage. "A masterpiece of a nuisance." I considered the forced fierceness of his face. "I shall say I know nothing about your wife's disappearance and that you are a blackmailing liar. People will believe me. My wife will certainly believe me. She'd make herself do so if your story was 10 times as possible. Your friend Bernardo and you will make a pretty couple of accusers. I shall say you are a crazy, jealous fool, and if you keep the game up, I shall have you run in. I'd not be altogether sorry to have you run in. There's one or two little things I don't like you for. I'd not be so very sorry to get quits. I had the better of him. He was baffled and angry, but I saw now plainly that he had no real fight in him. "And you know where she is," he said. I was too full of the spirit of conflict now to be discreet. "I know where she is, and you don't get her, whatever you do. And as I said before, what can you do about it?" "My God," he said, "my own wife." I leant back with the air of a man who had finished an interview. I looked at my wristwatch. He stood up. I looked at him brightly. "Well?" I said. "Look here," he sputtered. "I don't stand this, by God. I tell you I want Hetty. I want her. I want her, and I'll do what I like with her. Do you think I'll take this? Me? She's mine, you dirty thief." I took up a drawing for an illustration and held it in my hand, regarding him with an expression of mild patience that maddened him. "Didn't I marry her when I needn't have? If you wanted her, why the devil didn't you keep her when you had her? I tell you I won't stand it." "My dear Sumner, as I said before, what can you do about it?" He leaned over the desk, shook a finger as though it was a pistol barrel in my face. "I'll let daylight through you," he said. "I'll let daylight through you." "I'll take my chance of that," I said. He expressed his opinion of me for a bit. "I won't argue your points," I said. "I guess we're about through with this interview. Don't shock my clerk, please, when she comes in." And I rang the bell on my desk. His parting shot was feeble. "You've not heard the last of me. I mean what I told you." "Mind the step," said I. The door closed and left me strung up and trembling with excitement, but triumphant. I felt I had beaten him, and that I could go on beating him. It might be he would shoot. He'd probably got a revolver. But it was 10-1 he'd take the trouble to get a fair chance at me and screw himself up to shooting pitch. And with his loose, twitching face and shaky hand, it was 10-1 against his hitting me. He'd aim anyhow. He'd shoot too soon. And if he shot me, it was 10-1 he only wounded me slightly. Then I'd carry through my story against him. Millie might be shaken for a time, but I'd get the thing right again with her. I sat for a long time turning over the possibilities of the case. The more I considered it, the more satisfied I was with my position. It was 2:00 and long past my usual lunchtime when I went off to my club. I treated myself to the unusual luxury of a half bottle of champagne. Part 9. I never believed Sumner would shoot me until I was actually shot. He waylaid me in the passageway to the yard of Thunderstone House as I was returning from lunch just a week after our first encounter, and when I was beginning to hope that he had accepted his defeat. He had been drinking, and as soon as I saw his flushed face, half angry and half scared, I saw an intimation of what might befall. I remember that I thought then that if anything happened, he must get away, because otherwise he might be left to tell his tale after I was dead. But I didn't really believe he was man enough to shoot, and even now I do not believe that. He fired through sheer lack of nervous and muscular coordination. He did not produce his pistol until I was close up to him. "Now then," said he, "you're for it. Where's my wife?" And out came the pistol a yard from me. I forget my answer. I probably said, "Put that away," or something of that sort. And then I may have seemed about to snatch it. The report of the pistol, which sounded very loud to me, came at once, and a feeling as though I'd been kicked in the small of the back. The pistol was one of those that go on firing automatically as long as the trigger is gripped. It fired 2 other shots, and one got my knee and smashed it. "Damn the thing!" he screamed, and threw it down as though it had stung him. "Get out, you fool! Run!" I said, as I lurched towards him, and then As I fell, I came within a foot of his terrified face as he dashed past me towards the main thoroughfare. He thrust me back with his hand as I reeled upon him. I think I rolled over onto my back into a sitting position after I fell, because I have a clear impression of him vanishing like the tail of a bolting rabbit into Tottenham Court Road. I saw a van and an omnibus pass across the space at the end of the street, heedless altogether of the pistol shots that had sounded so terrible in my ears. A girl and a man passed with equal indifference. He was clear. Poor little beast. I'd stolen his Hetty, and now I was very clear-headed, a little numbed where I had been hit, but not in pain. I was chiefly aware of my smashed knee, which looked very silly with its mixture of torn trouser and red stuff, and a little splintered pink thing that I supposed was an end of bone. People from nowhere were standing about me and saying things to me. They had come out of the yard or from the public house. I made a swift decision. "Pistol went off in my hand," I said, and shut my eyes. Then a fear of a hospital came upon me. "My home, quite handy," I said. "8 Chester Terrace, Regent's Park. Get me there, please?" I heard them repeating the address, and I recognized the voice of Crane and Newberry's door porter. "That's right," he was saying. "It's Mr. Mortimer Smith. Anything I can do for you, Mr. Smith?" I do not remember much of the details of what followed. When they moved me, there was pain. I seemed to have been holding on to what I meant to say and do, and my memory does not seem to have recorded anything else properly. I may have fainted once or twice. Newberry was in it somehow. I think he took me home in his car? "How did it happen?" he asked. That I remember quite clearly. "The thing went off in my hand," I said. One thing I was very certain about. Whatever happened, they were not going to hang that poor, silly, hunted cheat, Sumner. Whatever happened, the story of Hetty must not come out. If it did, Millie would think only one thing, that I had been unfaithful to her, and that Sumner had killed me on that account. Hetty was all right now. I needn't bother about Hetty any more. I had to think of Millie and Sumner. It was queer, but I seem to have known I was mortally wounded from the very instant I was shot. Millie appeared, full of solicitude. "Accident," I said to her with all my strength. "Went off in my hand." My own bed. Clothes being cut away. Round my knee the cloth had stuck. The new gray suit which I'd meant should last the whole summer. Then 2 strangers became conspicuous. Doctors, I suppose, whispering, and one of them had his sleeves up and showed a pair of fat pink arms, sponges and a tinkle of water dripping into a basin. They prodded me about. "Damn, that hurt!" Then stinging stuff. What was the good of it? I was in the body they were prodding, and I knew all about it, and I was sure that I was a dead man. Millie again. "My dear," I whispered, "dear," and her poor, tearful face beamed love upon me. Valiant Millie. Things had never been fair to her. Fanny? Had Newberry gone to fetch her? Anyhow, he had vanished. She'd say nothing about Hetty. She was safe as what? What did one say? Anything. Safe. Poor dears. What a fuss they were all in. It seemed almost shameful to me to be glad that I was going out of it all. But I was glad. The pistol shot had come like the smashing of a window in a stuffy room. My chief desire was to leave kind and comforting impressions on those poor survivors who might still have to stay on in the world of muddle for years and years. Life. What a muddle and a blundering it had been. I'd never have to grow old now, anyhow. There was an eruption. People coming in from the dressing room. One was a police inspector in uniform. The others showed policemen through his plain clothes. Now was the time for it. I was quite clear-headed. Quite. I must be careful what I said. If I didn't want to say anything, I could just close my eyes. Bleeding internally, said someone. Then the police inspector sat down on the bed, what a whale he was, and asked me questions. I wondered if anyone had caught a glimpse of Sumner. Sumner bolting like a rabbit. I must risk that. It went off in my hand, I said. What was he saying? How long had I had that revolver? Bought it this lunchtime, I said. Did he ask why? He did. Keep up my shooting. Where? He wanted to know where? Highbury. What part of Highbury? They wanted to trace the pistol? That wouldn't do. Give Mr. Inspector a paper chase. Near Highbury. Not in Highbury. I decided to be faint and stupid. That way, I said faintly. A pawn shop. Best not to answer. Then, as if by an effort, little shop. Unredeemed pledges. I said nothing to that. I was thinking of another touch to the picture I was painting. I spoke with weak indignation. I didn't think it was loaded. How was I to know it was loaded? It ought not to have been sold loaded like that. I was just looking at it. I stopped short and shammed exhaustion. Then I felt that I was not shamming exhaustion. I was exhausted. Gods, but the stuffing was out of me. I was sinking, out of the bedroom, out from among this group of people. They were getting little and faint and flimsy. Was there anything more to say? Too late if there was. I was falling asleep, falling into a sleep so profound, so fathomless. Far away now was the little room full of people, and infinitely small. He's going, somebody said in a minute voice. I seemed to come back for an instant. I heard the rustle of Millie's dress as she came across the room to me. And then I heard Hetty's voice again, and opened my eyes, and saw Hetty bending down over me, in that lovely place upon this mountainside. Only Hetty had become my dear Sunray, who is mistress of my life, and the sunshine was on us, and on her face, and I stretched, because my back was a little stiff, and one of my knees was twisted. Wake up, I said Sunray. Wake up, and I shook you. And then we came and laughed at you, said Radiant, Firefly and I. And you said, then there is another life, said Firefly. And the tale is only a dream. It has been a good tale, Sarnac. And somehow you have made me think it was true. As it is, said Sarnac. For I am as certain I was Harry Mortimer Smith yesterday as I am that I am Sarnac here and now. End of section 23.
Section 24 of The Dream, a novel. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Dream, a novel by H.G. Wells. Chapter the 8th, the Epilogue. Section 1. The guestmaster poked the sinking fire into a last effort. So am I, he said, and then with profound conviction, that tale is true. But how could it be true? Asked Willow. I should be readier to believe it true if Sarnac had not brought in Sunray as Hetty, said Radiant. It was very dreamlike, the way Hetty grew more and more like his dear lady, and at last dissolved altogether into her. But if Smith was a sort of anticipation of Sarnac, said Starlight, then it was natural for him to choose as his love a sort of anticipation of Sunray. But are there any other anticipations in the story? Asked Willow. Did you recognize any other people who are intimate with you both? Is there a Fanny in this world? Is there a Matilda Good or a Brother Ernest? Was Sarnac's mother like Martha Smith? That tale, said the guestmaster stoutly, was no dream. It was a memory, floating up out of the deep darkness of forgotten things into a kindred brain. Sarnac thought, what is a personality but a memory? If the memory of Harry Mortimer Smith is in my brain, then I am Smith. I feel as sure that I was Smith 2,000 years ago as that I was Sarnac this morning. Sometimes before this, in my dreams, I have had a feeling that I lived again forgotten lives. Have none of you felt that? I dreamt the other day, said Radiant, that I was a panther that haunted a village of huts in which lived naked children and some very toothsome dogs, and how I was hunted for 3 years and shot at 5 times before I was killed. I can remember how I killed an old woman gathering sticks and hid part of her body under the roots of a tree to finish it on the morrow. It was a very vivid dream. And as I dreamt it, it was by no means horrible. But it was not a clear and continuous dream like yours. A panther's mind is not clear and continuous, but passes from flashes of interest to interludes of apathy and utter forgetfulness. When children have dreams of terror, of being in the wild with prowling beasts, of long pursuits and hairbreadth escapes, perhaps it is the memory of some dead creature that lives again in them? Asked Starlight. What do we know of the stuff of memory that lies on the other side of matter? What do we know of the relations of consciousness to matter and energy? For 4,000 years, men have speculated about these things, and we know no more today than they did in Athens when Plato taught and Aristotle studied. Science increases and the power of man grows, but only inside the limits of life's conditions. We may conquer space and time, but we shall never conquer the mystery of what we are, and why we can be matter that feels and wills. My brother and I have much to do with animals, and more do I perceive that what they are, I am. They are instruments with 20 strings, while we have 10,000. But they are instruments like ourselves. What plays upon them plays upon us, and what kills them kills us. Life and death alike are within the crystal sphere that limits us forever. Life cannot penetrate, and death will not penetrate that limitation. What memories are, we cannot tell. If I choose to believe that they float away like gossamer nets when we die, and that they float I know not where, and that they can come back presently into touch with other such gossamer nets, who can contradict me? Maybe life, from its very beginning, has been spinning threads and webs of memories. Not a thing in the past, it may be, that has not left its memories about us. Some day we may learn to gather in that forgotten gossamer. We may learn to weave its strands together again, until the whole past is restored to us, and life becomes one. Then perhaps the crystal sphere will break, and however that may be, and however these things may be explained, I can well believe, without any miracles, that Sarnac has touched down to the real memory of a human life that lived and suffered 2,000 years ago. And I believe that, because of the reality of the story he told, I have felt all along that whatever interrupting question we choose to ask, had we asked what buttons he wore on his jacket, or how deep the gutters were at the pavement edge, or what was the price he had paid for his cigarettes, he would have been ready with an answer, more exact and sure than any historian could have given. And I too believe that, said Sunray. I have no memory of being heady, but in everything he said and did, Even in his harshest and hardest acts, Smith and Sarnac were one character. I do not question for a moment that Sarnac lived that life. Section 2. But the hardness of it, cried Firefly. The cruelty, the universal heartache. It could have been only a dream, persisted Willow. It is not the barbarism I think of, said Firefly, not the wars and diseases, the shortened, crippled lives, the ugly towns, the narrow countryside, but worse than that, the sorrow of the heart, the universal unkindness, the universal failure to understand or care for the thwarted desires and needs of others. As I think of Sarnac's story, I cannot think of any one creature in it who was happy, as we are happy. It is all a story of love-crossed, imaginations like flies that have fallen into gum, things withheld, and things forbidden. And all for nothing, all for pride and spite. Not all that world had a giver who gave with both hands. Poor Millie. Do you think she did not know how coldly you loved her, Sarnac? Do you think her jealousy was not born of a certainty and a fear? A lifetime, a whole young man's lifetime, a quarter of a century, and this poor Harry Smith never once met a happy soul, and came only once within sight of happiness. And he was just one of scores and hundreds of millions. They went heavily and clumsily and painfully, oppressing and obstructing each other from the cradle to the grave. This was too much for the guest master, who almost wailed aloud. But surely there was happiness. Surely there were moods and phases of happiness. In gleams and flashes, said Sarnac. But I verily believe that what Firefly says is true. In all my world, there were no happy lives. Not even children? Lives, I said, not parts of lives. Children would laugh and dance for a while if they were born in hell. And out of that darkness, said Radiant, in 20 short centuries, our race has come to the light and tolerance, the sweet freedoms and charities of our lives today. Which is no sort of comfort to me, said Firefly, when I think of the lives that have been. Unless this is the solution, the guest master cried, that everyone is presently to dream back the lives that have gone, unless the poor memory ghosts of all those sad lives that have been are to be brought into the consolation of our happiness. Here, poor souls, for your comfort is the land of heart's desire, and all your hopes come true. Here you live again in your ampler selves. Here lovers are not parted for loving, and your loves are not your torment. Now I see why men must be immortal, for otherwise the story of man's martyrdom is too pitiful to tell. Many good men there were like me, jolly men with a certain plumpness, men with an excellent taste for wine and cookery, who loved men almost as much as they loved the food and drink that made men. And they could not do the jolly work I do and make comfort and happiness every day for fresh couples of holiday friends. Surely, presently I shall find the memories of the poor licensed innkeeper I was in those ancient days, the poor, overruled, ill-paid publican, handing out bad stuff in wrath and shame. I shall find all his troubles welling up again in me, consoled in this good inn. If it was I who suffered in those days, I am content. But if it was some other good fellow who died and never came to this, then there is no justice in the heart of God. So I swear by immortality now and henceforth, not for greed of the future, but in the name of the wasted dead. Look, the guest master continued, morning comes, and the cracks at the edge of the door curtain grow brighter than the light within. Go, all of you, and watch the mountain glow. I will mix you a warm bowl of drink, and then we will sleep for an hour or so before you breakfast and go your way. Section 3. It was a life, said Sarnac, and it was a dream. A dream within this life. And this life, too, is a dream. Dreams within dreams. Dreams containing dreams, until we come at last, maybe, to the dreamer of all dreams, the being who is all beings. Nothing is too wonderful for life, and nothing is too beautiful. He got up and thrust back the great curtain of the guest house room. All night we have been talking and living in the dark ages of confusion, and now the sunrise is close at hand. He went out upon the portico of the guest house and stood still, surveying the great mountains that rose out of cloud and haze, dark blue and mysterious in their recesses, and soaring up at last into the flush of dawn. He stood quite still, and all the world seemed still, except that, far away and far below, a mist of sounds beneath the mountain mists, a confusion of birds was singing. End of section 24. End of The Dream, a novel by H.G. Wells.